My grandmother's bakery smelled like brown butter and cardamom, and for 31 years of my life, that smell meant safety. It meant Saturday mornings watching her hands move through dough without measuring anything, meant the little bell above the door that rang every time a regular came in, meant the handwritten recipe cards she kept in a tin box with a faded rooster on the lid. She left it to me, every square foot of it, the equipment, the lease, the name, the tin box. And my uncle decided that was a mistake he was going to fix. I'm a paralegal. I've spent 6 years organizing other people's most important documents, their wills, their trusts, their property deeds. I know exactly what a legally binding document looks like, and I know exactly what it means when someone tries to pretend it doesn't exist. This is the story of how my uncle forgot what I do for a living. He won't make that mistake again. My grandmother, Nora, built the bakery from nothing in 1987. She immigrated from Oaxaca at 22 with my grandfather, who passed away before I was born. She had $40 and a recipe for pan dulce her own mother had taught her. By the time I was born, the bakery was a fixture on the street, the kind of place that had been there so long people gave directions, using it as a landmark. Turn left at Nora's. You can't miss it. She never expanded, never franchised, never let anyone talk her into a second location. She used to say the bakery had a heartbeat and you can't split a heart. I grew up behind that counter. I learned to make conchas at age 7. When I was 12, she taught me her sourdough starter, which she'd been keeping alive for over 20 years. She called it her third child. My mother was the first. My Uncle Patrick was the second. The starter is still alive. I fed it this morning. My mother moved to Portland when I married, following her own happiness, and my grandmother and I grew even closer over the years. I lived 20 minutes away. I stopped in 3-4 times a week. We'd sit in the back after closing, and she'd tell me stories about my grandfather, about Mexico, about the early years when she barely spoke English and had to point at things at the hardware store. She was the sharpest person I've ever known, sharp and funny and quietly stubborn in a way that took you a while to notice. My Uncle Patrick lived in Phoenix. He called on holidays sometimes. He visited maybe once a year, usually around Thanksgiving, when the bakery did a huge seasonal rush and the place smelled especially good. He'd eat my grandmother's food and tell her she should retire, that she was working too hard, that she deserved to rest. She'd smile and nod and then go open the bakery at 5 the next morning. He was not close to her. He was close to the idea of her, which is different. She passed away in October, quietly, in her sleep, at 81. Her doctor said it was her heart, that she hadn't suffered. I like to believe that's true. I was the one who found her. I had her spare key. I'd been stopping in every morning since she'd been slowing down. The grief was a physical thing. It sat in my chest like a stone. I couldn't cough up. I kept driving to the bakery out of habit, unlocking the door, standing in the dark with the smell of all those years, and just breathing. The will was straightforward. My grandmother had been meticulous. She'd worked with an estate attorney the previous spring. I'd actually helped her schedule the appointment, and everything was clearly documented. The bakery, its equipment, the commercial lease, the business accounts, the name, and her small house 2 miles away went to me. To her granddaughter Simone, who she described in the document as the one who stayed. My uncle received a cash inheritance, a meaningful sum. Enough for a down payment on a house, enough to matter. It was not nothing. But it was not the bakery. I found out he was unhappy about it when I got the text. I was at the bakery going through the vendor accounts when my phone lit up. It was from a number I didn't have saved. "Hey Simone, it's your cousin Brent, just wanted to give you a heads up. Uncle Patrick is really upset about the will. He's saying Grandma Nora wasn't thinking straight at the end. He's got a lawyer. Thought you should know. Don't tell him I told you." I read it twice. Then I set my phone down on my grandmother's work table, the one she'd had for 40 years, the surface worn smooth in exactly the places her hands always rested. I called my mother. "He's going to contest it," I said when she picked up. She was quiet for a moment. On what grounds? Diminished capacity, probably, or undue influence. That's the standard play. Simone, she was sharp as a tack. You know that. I know that. The question is whether he can make a judge believe otherwise. I heard my mother exhale. "What do you need?" I need you to send me every letter, every card, every email you have from her in the last 2 years. Anything that shows how she was thinking. I'll do it tonight. And Mom, don't call Patrick. She didn't. Good. The official notice came by certified mail 9 days after the will reading. My uncle and his wife, Diane, were petitioning to contest the will on the grounds that Nora had been suffering from cognitive decline and had been unduly influenced by a family member with unsupervised access to her home and finances. The family member with unsupervised access was me. I sat with that for a while. The accusation tasted like metal in my mouth. I had driven my grandmother to her appointments. I had helped her sort her mail when her reading glasses kept breaking. I had fixed her internet router 3 times because she kept unplugging it trying to dust. And now those things, those ordinary loving things, were being framed as manipulation. I thought about crying. Then I thought about the tin recipe box on the shelf above the oven. Then I went to find an attorney. Her name was Patricia Osei, a partner at an estate litigation firm downtown, with 22 years of experience in a habit of speaking very quietly that made you lean in and pay close attention. When I laid the petition on her desk and explained who I was and what I did for work, she looked up at me over her reading glasses. You're a paralegal. 6 years. Estate and property law. She looked back at the petition. So you understand exactly what they filed. I understand they're going to try to say my grandmother was incompetent. She wasn't. And I understand they're going to paint me as someone who took advantage of her. I didn't. Patricia set the petition down. What do you have? I had a lot. My grandmother wrote letters, real ones, on paper in her looping handwriting. She wrote to my mother, to her sister in Oaxaca, to a childhood friend who'd moved to New Mexico decades ago. She also wrote to me, even though we saw each other constantly. She'd leave notes on the bakery counter, in my jacket pocket, tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. Little dispatches. Things she was thinking about. Things she remembered. Things she wanted me to know. I had saved every single one. Over 6 years of stopping in at the bakery, of being close to her, I had accumulated a small archive. Notes, cards, printed emails, a few voice messages I'd saved to my phone and then backed up to the cloud because I had a feeling. The way you have a feeling about someone you love getting older, the way you start to hold on to things before you know you need to. I also had the testimony of her estate attorney who had met with her twice before drafting the will. I had her primary care physician, who had documented her cognitive health at every annual exam. I had the bakery's bookkeeper, who met with my grandmother monthly and described her as meticulous and precise, and I had the note she'd left me about the bakery. 2 years before she died, she started writing down things she wanted me to know, not because she was scared, because she was practical. Instructions for the starter, supplier contacts and which ones she trusted. A note that the oven on the left ran 5 degrees hot and I should always adjust. A note that the man who came in every Tuesday for a single almond croissant had lost his wife recently and could use a kind word. Patricia read through everything I'd brought in a large manila folder. When she finished, she looked at me. He has no case. I know, but he's going to file anyway, and that means we're going to court, and it's going to cost you time and money. I know that too. I folded my hands on my knees. I want to countersue for legal fees and damages. And I want discovery. Patricia tilted her head very slightly. You want to look at his finances? I want to look at everything. He's claiming she was financially vulnerable. I want to see who had access to what. There was a pause. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. Your uncle, Patrick, was he ever listed on any of her accounts? I thought about it. Her savings account. Years ago, she mentioned it once when my grandfather was first sick. She wanted someone to be able to help if something happened. Was he ever removed? I don't know, I said. And then, because I was a paralegal and I understood what I was saying, but we can find out. Patricia nodded slowly. Yes, we can. The discovery subpoena went in 2 weeks after we filed our response to the contest petition. My uncle's attorney, a man named Webb who had the confident manner of someone used to quick settlements, filed a motion to block it almost immediately. He called it a fishing expedition. He called it harassment. He called it an invasion of his client's privacy. The judge called it relevant. The petitioners have raised the issue of the decedent's financial vulnerability, she said at the preliminary hearing, her voice matter of fact. The respondent is entitled to examine the full financial picture. Motion denied. I don't think I'd understood until that moment how much I'd been holding my breath. The mandatory mediation happened 3 weeks before the trial date. A beige conference room in a downtown office building, Patricia and I on one side. My uncle, his wife Diane, and Webb on the other. I hadn't seen Patrick in 8 months. He looked different. Older, or maybe just tired. He wouldn't meet my eyes when I walked in. Diane, his wife, looked at me with an expression I recognized from a lifetime of family gatherings. That particular strain of polished dismissal that very organized women sometimes aim at people they've decided are beneath notice. She had perfect nails and a leather planner, and she checked her phone twice before Webb started talking. My clients are willing to be reasonable, Webb said, clicking his pen. They understand this is an emotional time. They're not interested in prolonged litigation. They're prepared to offer Simone a buyout in the amount of $60,000 for her interest in the bakery, allowing the property to pass into the estate for proper management. I watched Patricia not blink. Mr. Webb, she said pleasantly, your clients don't have an interest to negotiate. The will is valid. The bakery belongs to my client. We're here today because your clients filed a petition the evidence does not support. The petition raises legitimate questions about capacity. No, Patricia said with the same pleasantness. It doesn't. We have sworn testimony from the decedent's physician, her estate attorney, and 6 years of dated personal correspondence demonstrating clear and consistent intent. What we are going to trial to address is why this petition was filed at all. She paused. And what was happening with the decedent's savings account? The pen stopped clicking. My uncle looked up for the first time. His eyes went to the folder Patricia had placed on the table in front of her. The decedent's savings account, Webb said carefully. What about it? Patricia opened the folder and slid a single page across the table. It was a summary, account history in and out, going back 5 years. Your client was listed as a secondary account holder on Nora's savings account, Patricia said. Presumably placed there years ago to assist with bill management. In the 12 months prior to her death, there were 4 withdrawals from this account totaling $22,000. The funds were transferred to an external account. She slid a second page. This one. Diane's planner hit the table. That is completely out of context. The external account, Patricia continued, ignoring her, is a joint account held by Patrick and Diane. We have the records. The room was very quiet. I watched my uncle's face do something complicated. He looked at Webb. Webb was staring at the paper. This is, Webb started. $22,000, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Grandma thought it was going to utilities. She mentioned once that her electric bill seemed high and I told her I'd look into it. I never got the chance, but I looked into it now. My uncle finally looked at me. For the first time. His face was the gray-beige color of old newsprint. She would have wanted me to have it, he said. And the way he said it, quietly, almost reflexively, told me he'd been practicing that sentence, preparing it, telling it to himself for months. She had a will, I said. She told you exactly what she wanted. It just wasn't what you wanted. Patricia was already gathering the papers. We'll see you at trial, Mr. Webb. I'd strongly suggest advising your clients to consult with a criminal attorney before then. Webb stood. My uncle stood. My uncle stood. Diane grabbed her planner. None of them spoke on the way out. I sat in the beige room for a moment after the door closed. My hands were flat on the table. Patricia was organizing her folder. He thought contesting the will was a way to get ahead of this, I said. Almost certainly, she said. If the will was invalidated and the estate went into probate under his oversight, the account discrepancy might never have surfaced in a way that mattered. He forgot I'd be the one reviewing the accounts. As executor, he did. She snapped the folder shut. People forget things when they're greedy. The trial was in a small, wood-paneled probate courtroom that smelled like old paper and forced air heat. Patricia presented our case methodically, the way she did everything, without drama, without performance, just fact after fact arranged so tightly that there was no room for doubt. My grandmother's attorney confirmed the circumstances of the will's drafting. Her physician confirmed her cognitive health. I sat behind our table with my hands folded and listened to 6 years of my grandmother's life laid out as evidence. When Patricia read one of her notes aloud, a piece of paper she'd left me 2 years before she died, explaining how to tell when the sourdough was ready by the way it sounded when you knocked on the crust, and ending with, "You'll know, Mija, you always knew." I had to look at the ceiling. I did not cry in that courtroom. I refused to. Patricia then turned to the financial records. She was thorough. She explained the savings account structure. She explained how the transfers worked. She explained the timeline of those 4 withdrawals. 2 of them made while my grandmother was recovering from a hip replacement and relying on Patrick to help manage things while I was out of state for a work conference. The timing was not coincidental. The petitioners claimed the decedent was financially vulnerable, Patricia said, facing the judge. The evidence suggests the petitioners were the source of that vulnerability. My uncle's new attorney, Webb, had withdrawn 10 days prior, citing a conflict, tried to argue that the transfers were loans, that my grandmother had authorized them, that there was a misunderstanding about documentation. The judge listened to all of it. She was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression of very controlled patience. When my uncle's attorney finished, she looked at him for a moment. "Do you have any documentation of these loans?" she asked. "Promissory notes? Written correspondence? Text messages? Anything?" "The nature of the arrangement was informal, Your Honor." "I see." She wrote something down. There was a brief recess. During it, I went to the restroom and stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists the way my grandmother had taught me to do when I was a little girl, and it was summer and I was too hot. It had always worked. When we came back, my uncle's wife, Diane, walked to our side of the gallery instead of theirs. She sat 2 rows behind me. Patrick didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. She had a small envelope in her hands that she passed to Patricia's paralegal without making eye contact. I found out later it was bank records, her own, showing that the money transferred from my grandmother's savings had gone into the joint account and come back out again almost immediately, distributed to 3 separate accounts. 2 were credit cards. One was a loan servicer. They had needed the money. They had taken it. And then they had tried to take the bakery too, to settle accounts before anyone looked too closely. The judge came back. "In the matter of the will of Nora Castillo-Reyes," she said, her voice level and practiced, "I find the petition to contest wholly without merit. The decedent's capacity is clearly established by the record. The petition is denied in its entirety. The will stands." She paused. "I am awarding the respondent all legal fees." Another pause, longer this time. "I am further awarding punitive damages in the amount of $35,000, given the bad faith nature of this filing and the significant burden placed on the respondent." My uncle's jaw moved. "And," the judge continued, setting down her pen and looking directly at the petitioner's table, "I am referring the financial records in evidence to the district attorney's office. The transfers identified in these records warrant criminal review. Whether the parties wish to characterize those transfers as loans, gifts, or otherwise, that determination will now be made by the appropriate authority." She stood. The clerk said, "All rise." I stood. My uncle sat for a moment too long, until his attorney touched his arm. He looked like someone who had set a fire thinking they could control it and just watched it take the house. Diane had already left the gallery. The weeks after the ruling were strange and quiet. Patricia filed the paperwork. The punitive damages and legal fee award came through. I put most of it into a separate account I labeled Bakery Renovation Fund, because the refrigeration unit in the back had been making a noise for a year and I'd been putting it off. My uncle was charged 4 months later with 1 count of financial elder abuse, a felony under California law, and 1 count of theft from an elder or dependent adult. He pleaded not guilty. His trial is pending. Diane cooperated with the investigation early on and received a plea arrangement. They are, from what I understand, no longer married. My cousin Brent texted me the morning the charges were announced. Wow, just that. I responded with a thumbs up and went back to work. Nora's bakery reopened on the first Saturday of December, 3 weeks after I'd thought I could manage it. The refrigeration unit had been replaced. The floors had been refinished. The little bell above the door was the same one. I didn't touch it. The line that morning went around the corner. People who'd been coming for 40 years. Their kids. A woman who'd driven 40 minutes because she'd seen something on the neighborhood app. The man who came every Tuesday for the almond croissant showed up at 8:15. His name is Harold. He told me my grandmother had made his wife's wedding cake in 1991. I made him 2 croissants. I didn't charge him. The tin recipe box is on the shelf above the oven. The sourdough starter, Grandma's third child, my grandmother's, mine now, is in a ceramic crock on the second shelf of the proofing rack. I feed it every morning before I do anything else. It's the first thing I do when I come in. I don't know yet if I'll go to my uncle's trial. I know what I know. I gave my testimony to the DA's investigator in a conference room over 2 hours and a lukewarm cup of coffee, and I said what was true, which is the only thing I've ever known how to do. My grandmother knew who she was leaving the bakery to. She knew years before she made it official. She knew because I showed up. I showed up in the small ways and the large ways and all the ordinary ways that don't make for good stories. Unclogging drains, learning the delivery schedule by heart, sitting with her in the back after closing with 2 cups of tea and not always saying anything. She knew what the bakery needed. She knew what it meant. And she made sure in her meticulous, careful, stubborn way that it would be protected. She left me more than a bakery. She left me the documentation to defend it. I am a paralegal. I know what matters is what's in writing. And she had, in her own way, in every dated letter, every signed note, every 30-year record of a life built with her hands, left me an airtight case. I just had to know how to use it. The cardamom comes from a supplier in the Central Valley she'd been using for 18 years. I use the same one. The brown butter, I brown myself, every morning, the same way she taught me. And when the bakery smells right, when it smells the way it's supposed to smell, the way it smelled when I was 7 years old and didn't know yet how much I would come to need it, I know the answer to every question anyone ever asked about whether this place is mine. It is. It always was. She made sure of it. I used to think the hardest part of losing someone was the grief itself. That hollow, heavy thing that sits in your chest and doesn't move for weeks. But I was wrong. The hardest part is what comes after, when you find out who the people around you actually are, now that the person holding everything together is gone. My grandmother spent 60 years being decent. She showed up. She built something real with her hands, fed people, remembered their names, made wedding cakes for strangers who became regulars, who became family. And Patrick spent those same 60 years on the periphery of all of it, showing up when it was convenient, benefiting from her warmth without really earning it, and quietly watching the thing she built the way you watch something you've already decided you deserve. What I've come to understand is that people like Patrick don't think of themselves as dishonest. That's the part that used to confuse me. He genuinely believed he was owed something. He'd told that story to himself so many times, that Grandma Nora had always favored me, that I'd positioned myself, that the will wasn't really fair, that by the time he took $22,000 out of her savings account, he'd convinced himself it was just evening the score. That's how it works. You tell yourself a small lie, then a slightly bigger one, and eventually you're standing in a mediator's office insisting that theft was love. The truth has a way of not caring about any of that. I think about what my grandmother actually left me, beyond the recipes and the equipment and the lease. She left me the habit of documentation, of keeping things, of understanding that what matters is what's in writing, what's dated, what's signed. She didn't know she was building me a legal case when she tucked those notes into my jacket pocket. She was just being herself, careful, thorough, unwilling to leave things to chance. But that's what integrity actually looks like in practice. It's not a grand gesture. It's just doing the right thing so consistently for so long that it becomes the record, and that record protected both of us. I don't have any satisfaction about what happened to Patrick. That surprised me. I thought I would. But watching him sit in that courtroom, gray-faced, unable to meet anyone's eyes, his whole carefully constructed version of events dismantled document by document, I mostly just felt tired and a little sad. Not for what he lost, but for what he never had. He spent so long calculating what he was owed that he never built anything worth keeping. Nora's bakery opens at 6 every morning. The starter is alive. The oven on the left still runs 5 degrees hot, and I always adjust. Harold still comes in on Tuesdays. I stayed because I loved her, and I showed up because it was right, and I fought because she deserved to have her wishes honored. That's the whole story. Not strategy, not positioning, just showing up again and again, in all the small ways that nobody films and nobody applauds, until one day it turns out that's exactly what matters most. She knew what she was doing when she left it to me. I just had to be the person she already believed I was.